Sorry, starting my recording, all that good stuff. Let's say it all over again. But no, seriously, um, if the end of the game is to represent our clients, I mean, if we take that seriously, then our emotions should not come into play. I know that's a big ask, but if we're the true professionals, we that doesn't mean we can't defend our client, but there's intelligent ways to do it, and then there are absolutely unproductive, might I dare say, stupid ways of doing it, right? When you fire back, it just, whew, and it makes it so hard for me to come in as a broker. I literally, just as an example, had one in the past month that is now going to litigation because guess what? The agents made it personal and we're saying things back and forth. And even though the two brokers eventually got involved and we had a very reasonable solution, the emotions that were created from the agents being territorial and a little personal got in the way of us doing the pragmatic thing. And now everybody's lawyering up and going the litigation route. That's that's bad. That just doesn't serve anybody. And oh, by the way, that means the agent doesn't get paid along the way. A lot of energy expended, no paycheck. I don't know. Sounds like a bad business model at a bare minimum. So, all right. Well, let's get underway. How many of you, well, I talked a little bit about this in sales meeting. It's going to be a real quick rehash on that, but then we're going to get into the details. Everybody knows there's lawsuits going on, right? Nationwide, and they involve a whole host of things. But if I was to take the big pillars are um, uh, sellers should not have to pay for buyer's agent representation. That's one of the pillars. The second one is actually not having documentation in place and people wondering, why they're paying for things and it's not clearly defined. So the example I used in sales meeting last week was the state of Oregon, where I lived for a couple of years. Nutty as all get out in some regards, but they finally, just in the past 6 months, have buyer's agency. Up until 6 months ago, they didn't even have buyer's agency. So kind of crazy. Um, so the good news is the state of Utah, we're very proactive with our contracts and what we do in the realm of real estate. It doesn't mean we come out unscathed. I mean, out of the 13 or 15 lawsuits, we have one that is specifically targeted here in the state of Utah. That came out about a little over a week ago. And so I don't say those things to make everybody run away scared and paranoid and fearful, but it is a reminder that a lot of times we control our own destiny. If we do our job right, and we're going to come back to what that means. If we do our job not only right, but we do it well, we can drastically improve the probability of us staying unscathed. Okay. And today is going to kind of be in that regard. So I am now going to share my screen here. Last week, before I do that, what would be one of my trainings without some level of statistic or data or whatever? You guys know I enjoy this, but and I really do hope that it helps you. So this is if you are in the MLS and you simply go to statistics and click the first button, rapid stats. It'll pull up this dashboard that you're seeing on my screen right here. Okay. And I covered this one in sales meeting last week, but I'm just going to say, Haley, if you're going out on a listing appointment and it's an area that you're not terribly familiar, would it or would it not be helpful to be able to come in just before going there and being like, you know what? I'm going to just look and see how many listings there are today, and I'm going to compare it versus 30 days ago. I'm going to compare it against 6 months ago. I'm going to compare it against a year ago. Is that generally helpful information going into a listing? I mean, honestly, does a seller really care about that data?
I think they care.
Probably not to the degree we do, but what they do care about, I think we're all going to say the same thing here, is they want to know that they have a pro on the other end, right? They want to know that Haley actually knows her marketplace. And when she makes a recommendation that, hey, inventory is a little low, but it is growing, right? I mean, today we're sitting at 7,300 and we really haven't even hit the spike yet of properties. Maybe when she talks to me about let's get our pricing right, which I know she normally does anyway, but it could have more impact if I season it with just a little bit of data. Make sense? So it's not even an ask. My recommendation to you is if you want to be the pro, come in here once a week, come in here once a day, come here before your listings and just get the key data. How many properties have actually sold, right? In the last 30 days. What about the last 365 days, right? And you can kind of compare and get some data really quick. The under contracts, another key one. This is super easy data, and it's literally the very first screen you come to. You can certainly go more detailed on the market summary tab, right? These graphics are awesome, but just a reminder, you're all working very hard at your contracts, but don't forget some of the data and the marketing that coupled with your contract knowledge can really carry the day when you're stacked up against a competitor. Okay, that wasn't so painful, was it? That was a pretty tame stat intro on Monday morning. All right. Hey, so UAR came out last week, and they some of you may have attended the Zoom call that they had. If not, it's on Utah Association of Realtors, which is utahrealtors.com. You can go there and watch the 45-minute video. We're going to go into a little bit more detail than they do on the call about the changes that came about in the exclusive buyer broker agreement and the exclusive right to sell. Anything that's highlighted in green here are what I consider significant changes to those two documents. So just a 30,000 foot view, I'm going to quickly go through. I'm actually going to start with the ERS, and then I'm going to go to the EBB and the buyer due diligence really quickly. And just so what you see on my screen makes sense to you, green are changes that have come about just in the past week. Red underlines are interesting points, as well as yellow, I think, are key sections. So let's get after it, okay? All right, first of all, exclusive right to sell. With the lawsuits and everything like that, there has been some added clarity. You're going to see even more clarity on the buyer broker, but starting with the ERS. Let's take this first section here. The seller has negotiated with and agrees to pay the company a brokerage fee in the amount. That may not seem like a big deal, but they added the language, the seller has negotiated, right? The lawsuits are basically saying, oh, the seller has no control. There's price fixing. It's antitrust, anti-competitive, right? So this language is actually very powerful in helping us. We already had a good document, but this is taking it up a notch for us, okay? So the seller is going to sign this now that says they actually had the ability to negotiate and they agreed to pay the company a brokerage fee. But I just want to draw a point to this too. I talk about this all the time. A brokerage fee, right? Boy, I tell you what, somebody really wants to get a hold of me and I forgot to mute my phone. Let me turn that off. Okay, so it's kind of interesting in here because when we talk about a brokerage fee, that single fee, A is singular, right, consists of both a dollar amount and a percentage fee. Now, I've had people ask me, oh, do I have to have both? It's like, no, but if both are there, so for instance, a 2.5%, or sorry, 2.95 and 2.5%, all of that is considered a single fee. That seems like a really simple point, but I can't believe how many questions I still get on this. And then people want to break this down into two different fees, and they're contradicting the very nature of this paragraph. It is a single fee known as brokerage fee. That is the title of the section. I mean, it should be pretty straightforward for people, but I think they get lost in the contract sometimes. Any questions so far? That's pretty straightforward, right? All right. So it goes on. The rest of this language, you know, in this midsection is pretty standard boilerplate from the first one. But then, and this is a little bit of a win for me, I shared this with a couple of you. The company shall offer a buyer brokerage compensation, right? What did it used to call it? Anybody? Come on, trivia. Somebody help me out.
Buyer's agency.
Ooh, you were so close, Haley.
Buyer's agent commission.
There you go.
Yeah.
They said buyer agent commission. And about a year ago, I sent a detailed video email with the, you can imagine, right? I'm sending this to the attorneys at UAR. I've got videos, I've got highlights. I'm like, you guys are fundamentally contradicting the Real Estate Licensing Practices Act, which says an agent can't be paid a commission, and you put it right in a document. And so it takes a while to get those updates, and I'm glad to see that they have changed that now to buyer brokerage compensation. And oh yes, by the way, if you're paying attention to utahrealestate.com, they are updating the field from BAC to BBC. Okay. All right. And then the last sentence there is very, very important, right? Brokerage fees are not set by any board or association of realtors or MLS or in any manner other than between the buyer and the seller, right? And I love the fact that they put that in all caps. It's kind of like, how can you ignore that? It's right there in your face. So the brokerage fee is now largely taken care of, secure, more stable, more protected from class action lawsuits who say the sellers have been taken advantage of. And let me just go down to the other green section here, which is in section 8, class action waiver. This section was added in particular. So this is talking about attorney's fees and legal proceedings. And then at the tail end, it says, in particular, the seller agrees not to be a representative or member of any class of claimants or act as a private attorney general in litigation, arbitration, administration proceeding with respect to any claim arising out of this listing agreement. Basically saying you don't, if you're going to sign this document, you don't get to participate in a class action. That's in the world of attorneys, there's a whole species of attorneys who look for class action lawsuit, right? I'm thinking of like the Sokolov law firm. You see them on a lot of infomercials on TV, and they just look for opportunities to find hundreds, if not thousands of people to pool together and get huge judgments, of which the attorneys keep the lion's share. All right. So those are the green sections that have changed, and I'm just going to now rapidly go back and hit my highlights other than the green, because I think it's important. My hope today is we come away from this, certainly with an ERS, you know, ERSs are not as hard for the company to get from our agents. Buyer brokers still seems to be a challenge. So I'm going to rapid fire through the ERS just to explain to you some of the things that are so important that you may gloss over. So the first one, Susan Dunleavy or any of my office managers, how many times do we get agents who say, well, I'm not putting the property on the MLS. Do I really have to have a data input form? Because that's a MLS form. And our answer is?
Yes.
Yes, you do, right? I mean, it's right here in section 1. It says that you're going to put it at the listing price and terms stated on the attached property data form. Huh. So if you don't have the property attached property data form, then you probably don't have what they call a complete agreement or a meeting of the minds. So it's called out in paragraph 1, right? It does go and talk about, we get this all the time. It's like agents putting an addendum saying, well, you know, my listing expired and we're under contract, so I have to extend the listing. No, you don't. It's covered right here. If it goes under contract, it will automatically extend until it either closes or it's no longer under contract. So just be aware that verbiage is already there. And then I have this discussion with people on a pretty regular basis. Well, what qualifies for me earning my commission? I mean, well, the company's commission. And if you find somebody who's ready, willing, and able to buy, lease, exchange the property, right? But that's not when the payment is due, right? The payment is due when we talk about, where am I here? When we actually go to closing, that's actually when it is payable, right? It's earned here if you find a ready, willing, and able buyer. Now, by the way, please don't come to me and say, I found a ready, willing, and able buyer. They didn't close on the property, and therefore I want to sue them for commissions. I've talked to so many attorneys on this. It's pretty challenging to pursue this, right? One, who's going to pay us the commissions if we brought a ready, willing, and able buyer? Come on. Anyone?
Seller's brokerage.
Correct. And because of the contract with the seller. So if you're representing a buyer and you think you're going to sue a seller's brokerage for commissions, I'm just going to share a little tidbit with you guys on the call here today. The MLS rules, of which there are many, says one of the rules says if it becomes practically impossible or unreasonable for the seller's brokerage to get the commissions from the seller, they do not have to pursue the commissions. So just strike this one from your mind. You're either going to get it under contract and do it or not. Now, listen, if you were under contract and they turn around and sell to somebody else, different story. But don't come to me going, I found a ready, willing, and able buyer. Let's go sue them. All right. Parker, I'm going to pick on you. You've known me for a good long time. What would I
Yes.
recommend be put into the protection period?
6 to 8 months.
Yeah, I say at least 6 months, right? I see still in our own company 0 months, 1 month, 2 months, and then inevitably I have somebody call me up and say, hey, Brooker Barton, I have somebody that's being squirrely on my listing agreement. Why don't you help me pursue him? I'm like, well, what does your protection period say? Oh, I put 0. I'm like, well, I'm not a magician. You got to help me here. Now, can I suggest a quick dialogue for you here? Parker, role play with me. Parker,
Yes, sir.
I'm presenting this to you as my prospective seller, and we just finished the brokerage fee, and I did an excellent job, by the way, so there's no arguments. And we finished section 2 and I go to 3. Hey, Parker, by the way, a lot of the sections that are in the listing agreement here are things that have been recommended by the Division of Real Estate because in the past they've dealt with problems. In particular, this section 3 deals with people who, I don't know how else to say it, but are kind of sketchy. They use somebody to list their house and then they look for a way on the back end to weasel out of a deal that they signed. And by the way, Parker, I apologize for saying this to you because I know you're not that type of person. What did I just do?
Thanks for pigeonholing me into a corner.
That's right. What are you going to do? Turn around and argue with me? No, I am a scumbag and I am going to try and take advantage of you on the
That's
back
right.
end of this contract, right? And so our company policy is to put a 12-month protection period there. Okay. And then I move on. I don't even really give them a time to answer. My experiences with agents who approach this with trepidation and fear and, oh my gosh, A, they don't have a good dialogue, and B, they don't do it with confidence. Most of these things, if you approach them with confidence, and I'm not saying to snow people, just say it with confidence. I know you're not this type of person, Parker. Our company policy is to protect that for 12 months. And really all it means is if I or the company shows you a property within 12 months, you're not going to loop back and try and do a deal circumventing this contract. Fair enough?
Yeah.
Fair enough. All right. Section 4. That was it. I don't know why this becomes such a big deal for most agents. Now, I'm not talking about the 1%.
Now, Matt.
Yeah.
Let's go into the other concern from a seller. Well, what if we're working together and I just decide that this isn't going to work out, or I decide I want to lease the property?
Okay. Well, a lease is covered under this, by the way. So, hey, I'm glad you brought up lease because like I mentioned up here above, Parker, a lease is actually covered under this. Of course, the amount's going to be different because the dollar amount for a lease is less, but we're willing to take that risk as a company. Any other questions? Now, notice I just dodged the one he really asked, which was, what if it doesn't work out?
What if I can cancel it, basically?
Yeah. Can I cancel it? What is your answer collectively? Parker, I'm not going to let you answer. I want somebody else to answer. What would you do in that situation if somebody says, hey, if we're working on this and it's just not working out, you're not showing me the properties I want, how do we cancel this contract? What would you say?
And I can't answer, right?
You can't answer, Parker.
Okay.
I want somebody else to step up.
All right.
James, you want to give it a swing?
Trying to unmute. Am I there?
Yeah, you're there.
When that comes up, I always just tell them if they want to fire me. I've never been fired before, but they can fire me. I would never stand in the way of forcing them to work with somebody they didn't want to work with. But I would also tell them that I will keep in touch with them regularly, and I'd reiterate my plan. And I would tell them if they ever felt like I wasn't representing them as they thought they should be represented, let's talk about it and make sure that they know what I'm doing and I know what they expect. So I
I
would
like it. I like it.
sure that they have full control over the whole process.
Yeah, reestablish the value. And listen, I'm going to put one clear guardrail in there in that discussion. It's like, hey, listen, James, I appreciate you bringing up that concern. You're not the first person that it just shows me you're paying attention to the contract. Listen, my company is very good. We will never, stand in the way of somebody. If we just literally can't get the job done, if I can't find properties that meet your criteria, see what I'm doing here? I'm building a list of things that I can do. So it's going to be hard for him to later say, well, you didn't do those things. Or if I can't explain the contract to you or whatever the case may be, as long as we're not under contract, that's the key. As long as we're not under contract, I have the ability to go to my broker and either transfer you to another agent that you would be satisfied with, or worst case scenario, terminate the agreement. Is that fair? Yeah. And you know what? The odds are in doing this 18 years, I think I've had that like once where the person has insisted on pursuing it and being released, right? And your point is exactly right, James. The last thing we want to do is work with somebody who is just so begrudgingly working with us. I mean, they become a negative billboard. And I'm not talking about the people that are like, oh, well, if we get the agent out of the way, I'm talking legitimately, there's a conflict of personality or we just can't find them a property. Yes, of course, we will let them out of a contract, right? But definitely not if they're already under contract. That's proof that we did our job. Okay. All right. Moving on, professional advice. Again, it's not that these other sections aren't important, but for sake of time, I'm just hitting the ones that I think are very important to us. Professional advice explains all the things that we do not do. We are not professionals, right? This section 6 goes hand in hand. Same verbiage is basically in the buyer broker agreement, and it's definitely reiterated in the buyer due diligence. But here's the key section. Any recommendations for third-party services made by the company or the seller's agent do not guarantee the seller's satisfaction in the use of those third-party services. And oh, by the way, at the seller's sole discretion, they get to choose which third-party services they meet. So can we recommend title? Can we recommend home inspectors? Can we recommend radon mitigation, I should say? We can do a whole host of things and have a good degree of protection if they've signed this agreement, right? Because it's spelled out right there. We're going to give you recommendations, but it's at your sole discretion as the seller or the buyer to choose who you're going to choose, okay? All right, section 9, just really quickly here, you'll notice that I put a little red box here. So section 9 talks about all the things that we are authorized to do. And because of a lawsuit I was involved in a couple of years back, I now recommend to agents, be careful of implied duties. If you're not going to do it, consider striking it from section 9. So I highlighted in A through K the ones that we almost always say yes. F, if you're not going to hold an open house, say item F to be removed from section 9, right? Then you don't have an implied duty of doing an open house. Order a home warranty plan. Now, again, this falls per the previous section we just talked about. We're going to recommend, they're going to choose, but we have the ability to order on their behalf. J is an important one, but it's really just for future marketing for real estate services. And then being able to put earnest money into the UAR HOF trust account, earning interest for affordable housing. All right, 10, big deal. Make sure, again, if you want my marked up copies, send me an email. I'll send you these when we're done. But this is the key section, I think, in the personal property. Hey, if you have valuable things, guns, illegal drugs, prescriptions, jewelry, or whatever, it's your job as the seller to make sure they're secure. Don't just rely on the document. Make sure you talk through the section with your client, okay? And then FERPTA, I'm not going to go into that. If they're a foreign national, a certain chunk of the proceeds can be held back at closing and probably will be held back until they can prove that all of the taxes have been paid.
Matt, really quick, if we're making changes to, like, we're not gonna hold open houses, does that need to be done in an addendum, or could we just strike it and do the initial, what do we do?
Yeah. Oh, James, you're a bold man, because I see all of my office managers chomping at the bit. The DRE basically says, and it specifically applies to the Rep C, but it applies to agreements. They say do not strike out, white out, or otherwise alter an executed contract. So our company's policy is use the blank addendum, just steer clear, because you don't want to be in a situation like, well, I didn't scratch that out. I never agreed to that. The client saying that. If it's in an addendum, has a signature, it's pretty indisputable. If it's just a scratch out with or without initials, and when did that happen? What was the timing of it? It just creates a cloud over the issue. And I just believe in keeping it clean. Make sense? All right. Let's bounce to the EBB. All right. We're going to go faster because we covered some of this in the ERS, and there's similar language between the two of them. So you will notice, so let me bring this up. Can I do this? Sorry, guys, I'm rearranging my screen here. Give me just a minute. Way too many things open. Okay, so I'm going to put the new one on the left, and I'm going to put the old one on the right. We seeing this okay, mostly? You'll notice the brokerage fee section in the new EBB. Wow, I'm on the ERS. Here we go. There we go. All right, section 2, this whole section right here. In the old document, it was just one paragraph. Now there's 2.1, 2.2, 2.3. Okay. 2.1 is specifically in regards to the obligation to pay a brokerage fee. All the things that I said previously apply. There is in section 2.2, we start with a conditional if the property acquired by the buyer is listed with a brokerage on a multiple listing service, the buyer's brokerage compensation, notice they're now consistent, paid to the company by the listing brokerage shall satisfy the buyer's obligation to the brokerage fee shown above, provided, there's the second part of the conditional, that the BBC is equal to or more than the amount shown above. Okay. Then we get into the important part here. The buyer may negotiate with, so if the amount is less, right? Let's say they sign a exclusive buyer broker agreement for 3%, and on the MLS, the seller's willing to pay 2%. In that situation, it further clarifies for the buyer. The buyer may negotiate with the property owner and or the listing brokerage to satisfy the buyer's remaining obligation to pay the brokerage fee. Right? That didn't used to be there. That's a completely new language. So you want to be prepared for that. I would say get ahead of the language and use it to your advantage, because the question is almost always on the section going to be, well, what happens if the seller's not going to cover that amount? Well, it's actually spelled out now in the contract. This is language that we had a very small percentage of buyers say, well, I want something in there to protect me if it comes below the amount in brokerage fee. I want to make sure that I'm not stuck with it. Well, this opens the door for them to not be stuck with it. Okay. But the second part is, if you don't have an agreement in writing to deal with that situation, then yes, you are, as the buyer, required to pay the brokerage fee as spelled out in section 2.1. Okay. Then you'll notice same caps language that's in the ERS. Brokerage fees are not set by any board or association of realtors or MLS or in any manner other than between the company and the buyer.
Hey, Matt.
Yes.
So back on that where it says buyer may negotiate with the property owner, is that done at the time you write the contract?
Yeah. So I would imagine a situation, Don, where if, let's just use that example, they signed a 3% BBC, or brokerage fee, I should say, and the listing just happened to be 1.5%, right? Well, my job as their realtor is to be like, hey, per our agreement, you know, we're going to be coming in 1.5% less. How do you want to handle that? Right? Sometimes we do our clients' thinking for us. And I can anticipate a question, Don, would it be unreasonable for somebody to say, well, what do you mean? How can we handle it? Pretty standard response to that, right? Like, well, you can bring the cash to close for 1.5% to make up the difference. What else would we offer them, Parker?
Oh, I'd offer him the, oh, am I, sorry.
Yo, you're good.
For some reason, I thought I was muted. I apologize. So, I would offer him the real estate brokerage payment addendum as an option.
Yeah. Hey, Don, here's an idea. Listen, I don't ever want to put the deal in jeopardy. Here's an option. It doesn't seem like, from what I've talked to the listing agent, they've got any other offers in. We could go back with an addendum that says the seller's willing to make up some of that gap. Would that be something we'd be willing to do to put into your contract? Man, that was tough dialogue, right?
I guess my real question was, for so many years, we've been taught that commission can't be part of the contract, that now it is.
So I'm going to tell you, your instincts are right. It is, but it is in the way that is legal. So what used to be illegal, not illegal, which was not permitted by the Division of Real Estate, was to negotiate what at the time was known as BAC, because that was between two brokers and the contracts between buyer and seller. So they're saying you as agents and brokers can't negotiate your commissions in a REPSI. But when they created the brokerage payment addendum, and I know this seems like splitting hair, and it really is, but it is what makes it legal or acceptable versus not acceptable. What the difference is, it's saying, hey, seller, are you willing to pay some of the buyer's obligation for X? Right? Now, we do that all day long with closing costs. We do it with buying down rates. We do it with paying for a home warranty. So now they've allowed via that addendum to say, well, the buyer's obligated to pay their brokerage a certain amount of money. Are you willing as the seller to pay some of that? So it becomes a negotiation between buyer and seller versus two brokerages negotiating their commission. You see where the split is there? I know it's a kind of ticky-tack, but it's what makes it legitimate versus illegitimate.
So Matt, for those of us, you know, for those agents who have been in the business for a long time, like Don or myself, why would we not use escrow instructions as opposed to the brokerage real estate payment addendum?
Oh, Parker, you're just toying with me, aren't you? Certainly we can do that, right? But in this new day and age, right? And I shared this in sales meeting, we're starting to see some properties on the MLS that are showing zero compensation, zero buyer broker, right? So that's the extreme case. We're not going to pay anything. Anything you want has to be negotiated. Well, I'm using that example specifically for the escrow question. We're assuming that their listing agreement with their client only has enough commissions for the seller side, right? Well, what broker is going to, in that situation, is going to turn around and say, well, I'll just offer up some of my hard-earned cash for the buyer. If the seller wants to do that, the seller can do that, right? But that's going to happen either through the brokerage payment addendum or as a listing agent, I could be like, well, listen, we have somebody who's interested on the other side. Your current exclusive right to sell with us is for 3% or 2.5%. That's it. There is no BBC. We can do an addendum for this specific buyer to your ERS that increases the brokerage fee, let's say to 5%, and we will pay out 2.5% to the other side, right? Well, in that case, since the MLS says zero, then in that situation, we would then have escrow instructions because it's now between two brokers, right? The only time you use the escrow instructions is when something is changing between the two brokers. If it's changing between buyers and sellers and what their obligations are to the respective companies, use the brokerage payment addendum.
Okay.
Trust me, we're going to get questions on this for the next year. I promise you. It's a pretty subtle thing until you see it, and then it becomes crystal clear. Marianne, go ahead.
Okay, so oftentimes in 2.1, the agent's going to put 3%. But, many, many times listings are 2.5, whatever. And we just don't ever collect that extra money for the most part.
Not true.
Well, a lot of times from my observation.
Let me say that a different way.
Okay.
If the agent comes to their broker and makes the case,
Mhm.
yeah, we give our agents latitude. That was with an L, latitude. Okay, I'm glad somebody caught that. We never want to stand in the way, but if we're going to use that as an example, if somebody comes in and says, oh, well, the BAC is 0.25%, no, we're going to have to figure something out there, right? If it's 3% on the EBB and the commission's at 2.75, yeah, it's going to be pretty easy for the company to say, well, it's your call as the agent. If you feel like there's a business reason why, we want to take 0.25% less, fantastic. We'll support you in that.
Matt, what additional paperwork do you require when those are offset, when they're not the same?
Yeah. So it's a great question, Haley. Most of the time, we're getting this type of information pretty close to closing, right? And so we have to, as the agent and the brokerage, review, per state law, we have to review the settlement statements to make sure they're in agreement with what we've agreed to. And so if it's showing 2.75 on the settlement statements and we're in agreement, no other documentation is necessary. Now, having said that, a lot of times the buyers want documentation, right? They want to be like, yeah, I want to make sure for sure. Great. Let's do a blank addendum and say on this particular property. And I would always suggest you do it that way, because what happens if something falls out, right? And you move on to property number 2. We should go back to the original terms. So just say on property 123 Main Street, the brokerage fee owed in section 2.1 shall be 2.75%. That way the buyer's happy. They've got it ironclad in their greedy little fists, and away they go.
But you're not requiring it for us. If the agreement is all there and everybody's good. I mean, it seems like we probably should put it in writing regardless.
It's probably a good practice. And when you use my other extreme example, if the other side was coming in with 0.5%, I mean, we don't work for free. The company takes on risk for litigation and other things on every deal that we bring through. So doing it for 0.5% doesn't make sense. So the good news is some of the people on the call, your office managers, they know if we go below a certain percentage, yeah, we're going to require documentation. So if it's a 1/4 point, if it's a 1/2 point, we're probably not going to wake you up or give you a hard time.
This is James. I know you've said this, but if in your initial meetings with buyers and sellers, with buyers, particularly you sit down, you have them sign documents, you explain to them how commissions work, and sometimes sellers pay it, and sometimes they don't. If they will always know what commissions are, they will always know what their responsibility is. If they choose to buy that home, they'll know that the commission being offered is less, and that they will make up the difference, but what they should focus on the total price they're going to pay. I mean, I think if you do that initially, you don't have the fight later. And honestly, I've known it just isn't very, very often an issue if they know what they're starting with, and how the process is going to go.
James, I thank you for reiterating that. So much of what we do with our clients is all about managing expectations, right? If you're clear up front, usually when we have problems with just about anything in the contracts, it's quite often because the agent literally just blew through it, or worse, they just sent it over via DocuSign or DigiSign and said, just sign this and get it back to me, right? and then something comes up along the way of the contract where commissions aren't exactly lined out, and there was no discussion up front, and as a result, all of a sudden you're dealing with somebody who's a little frustrated. So your point is well taken. If we do our job and we explain it, it eliminates a lion's share of the probability of things going sideways. So good reminder. Thank you.
Hey, Matt.
Haley,
Hey.
back to your point, Haley. I would just say always, you will never get an argument from me to always document. So if we're going to change it, a simple addendum to the EBB, and
Well,
the
and
office managers won't squawk either.
I think it's maybe valuable to mention here. I mean, everybody knows, but we can receive more compensation on the MLS than what is written in this agreement. So my practice in the current market has been to keep, 2.5 in that place, because so many, that's kind of what we're seeing a lot.
Sure.
But if it falls below that, then we deal with that. But then I don't have to adjust it with documentation when I'm forgiving 0.5% because we're not getting the full 3 quite as often.
Right. And I think that section you're referring to, right? If it comes in, if you're at 2.5 and it comes in at 3, you have no obligation. I mean, that is not buyer's money. That is from broker to broker, right? It says
Right.
fees shown above, provided that the BC is equal to or more than the amount shown. It's already covered in the contract. Okay.
It should be mentioned that the real estate brokerage payment addendum is a really good addendum.
Yeah.
And if you make it as a standard practice when you're seeing a 2.5% to ask for that additional 0.5% along with the contract, assuming your client's okay with it, it can really pay dividends for you.
I'm glad you added that last part, Parker, right? It should always be at the request of an informed client, right? We need to explain to them what the options are, let them choose, right? Don't just, and I know you were not proposing this, don't just be like, we're going to use this addendum, right? That should never be the discussion or the dictate. It should be, hey, here's what we're up against. There's a couple ways to handle this. Here's what I would propose we handle, but what are your thoughts? Okay. All right.
Wait,
In order for that to take place, Matt, sorry, I think in order for that to take place, you really have to educate your client from the very beginning. Hey, look, sometimes this is how the BBC is done. Let me tell you, how this works, yada, yada, yada. That way you're setting the expectation up front so you don't have any problems when it comes to the point of submitting offers.
Pareto principle, 80-20 rule. You guys are part of the 20%, right? You're the ones that I don't worry about so much. You're going to do a good job in presenting your contracts. Marianne, quick comment.
just in regards to the ERS, are we okay if some of the agents do a 0% or 1% listing, of BDC?
I go back to my former comment.
Okay.
If their client signs that and that's what they want to offer, we're going to see more of it, guys.
Okay.
We're going to see it. We will probably end up doing some type of documentation that is a disclosure of some sort, saying if they don't offer any compensation, which they're entitled to do, it will impact the marketability of their property, right? Okay, I'm going to rattle through these last ones really quickly because I want to finish off on the BDD. The buyer broker agreement, it still boggles my mind that agents are resistant to getting this. I've covered this previously. Rule 2 and Rule 10 at the DRE says you're going to get your agency when you start working as an agent. Rule 10 says you're going to confirm it in the REPC when you write the REPC, right? They're not mutually exclusive. They're both required. And here's some of the justification why. Can you imagine how great it is to have the language like, oh, by the way, I'm covered by a protection period, so you can't, do an end run on me. You go to section 4, right? The buyer warrants that they have not entered into any other buyer broker agreement with another brokerage that is still in force and effect. That's a code of ethics violation that we just deal with on a pretty regular basis. Not only are we required to ask them, but then they're going to also sign a document saying, yep, we're essentially positively affirming we're not under contract with another brokerage. That's a good protection. Then you go to section D, you're going to hold harmless the company and the buyer's agents against any claims of the result of injuries incurred while inspecting any property. I don't know. I've had a few clients where it's like, I don't know if I want to do stairs with them. I'm afraid they're going to fall down, right? If they do, I'm not trying to be, you know, mean or anything, but we're covered. If they're clumsy, if they tend to walk into beams with their head or trip and fall down, you've got coverage there if you have a signed buyer broker agreement, right? And then it also makes reference to, oh, by signing this, they're also agreeing contractually to sign the buyer's due diligence list, which also takes this up like 5 notches. Okay. Let's go down to the professional advice. I'm just going to reiterate the same thing here. It talks about all the things that we are not, right? We don't get to weigh in. I currently have a lawsuit right now, right? That the physical condition of the property, legal or tax matters, the buyer is advised not to rely on the company or any of the agents for a determination regarding the physical or legal condition of the property, including but not limiting to past or present compliance with zoning, et cetera, et cetera. It goes on with a pretty exhaustive list. I don't know about you, but I want that type of protection when I am representing somebody, and you don't have this unless you have this agreement signed. You don't have it. That means you're at risk. And my favorite phrase, and Susan would say it if she was unmuted, it's never a problem until it's a problem, right? That's what we govern to. All right. We do have the additional verbiage in here saying they can't participate in a class action lawsuit, which is awesome. And then also it gives us other authorizations like disclosing the sales price on the MLS when we're done, and allows us to continue to communicate with them because they're now part of our SOI. They're giving us permission. It also incorporates, like specifically in section 10, the buyer due diligence and the wire fraud. Now, let me ask you a question. If it says it in here that they are, and then you don't get them signed, meaning the buyer due diligence and or the wire fraud alert disclosure, how good are those documents? They're not worth anything. In fact, it could be problematic for you. You'd say, well, you were supposed to provide that to me. Contractually, it said you're going to provide them to me. And you didn't even provide them to me to sign. It turns from a positive to a liability. So check this as R and make sure you get those things signed. I'm going to pull back here for a minute. When is the easiest time to get somebody to sign a document? It's not a trick question. Come on.
When they want you to do something.
When they want you to do something, when the carrot is being dangled out in front. How many of you have had the experience? It's a rhetorical question. I don't want anybody to be, shamed on my call. But how many of you think over your career have actually worked with a buyer, maybe even done under contract, and then you have to go back and try and get them to sign a buyer due diligence or some other document? Pretty problematic, because I've heard it from multiple agents who've been in that category. They just won't sign it. Well, why do you think they won't sign it? Well, because we're already under contract. Yeah, that's why we get these things signed in advance, right? They're way more willing to sign before you show them a house, before you go under contract, than to come back after the fact and try and backfill. Okay, last little section here. The effective date. This is a key one. The effective date of this buyer broker agreement has 2 components. One, the buyer and the authorized agent have signed. That's the first part. And B, the authorized buyer's agent or broker has received a mutually signed copy of the exclusive buyer broker agreement. So just because you sent it to them and they say they signed it, it's not effective until you have a copy back. And if you have a copy back, you better get it to us. All right, last thing really quickly, not going to go through all this. This buyer due diligence, when you talk to real estate attorneys, they literally refer this to as your get out of jail free card, if you're going to use the Monopoly metaphor, right? And I love this first paragraph. I put the red box on. I did not put the gray box on. So anytime somebody's signing a contract and it's in a box and there are capital letters in it, it's a contract's way of saying this is really, really important and we're drawing it out to you so you don't miss it. So what does it say? This is a notice from the company. And this is really what it's saying here is, we're a company that helps you buy and sell and market real estate. That's what we do. We don't do more. We don't do less. And we're going to use this document to explain to you all the things we don't do, but you should probably consider doing as an ordinary prudent buyer. But this middle section is the most glaring. Buyer is advised not to rely on the company or any of its agents for a determination regarding the physical or legal condition of the property. That is like super, super helpful contract language in protecting you. Then it goes on to say all the things. I joke with clients when I occasionally still meet with them and say they really should just change the title of this document to all the things your realtor is not, right? I don't work for the city. I'm not a property manager. I don't work for the EPA. EPA again. I'm not a surveyor. I don't sell home warranties, although I might recommend somebody to you. I don't issue insurance. I am not the title company. I am not a home inspector. I did not determine the square footage. I don't represent the utility companies, including cable and others. Water. And by the way, I love this one. I love the fact that we have to say geologic conditions, right? I mean, we're affectionately here on the Wasatch Front, right? That's not to be construed as the front of a geographical area. It's a front as in a geological lift, like thousands of feet. We have mountains because of geological conditions. So I love the fact that, but it's covered, right? Mold, housing compliance, property taxes. Hey, they added a while ago PIDs, public infrastructure districts. Anyway, my final point on this, and to wrap up today, is these documents are hugely important. That last one, the buyer due diligence, let me just say this, and this comes straight from attorneys. If you have the protection of that document, then don't go and do something stupid that makes you lose the protection of said document. So if it says you don't work for the city and you really don't understand the rules in regards to an ADU or a specific zoning use, or then just do that. Stop talking. You have the protection in your document. The only thing you should be saying is, I already told you in the buyer due diligence that I'm not qualified. Why don't we go talk to the city, to the people who are the professionals in regards to zoning? But you know what happens a lot of times? Agents, we think we're really good and we had an experience in Mapleton or some other city. And, oh, you know what? I'm pretty sure that, yeah, this is going to conform to, you know, Mapleton's code in regarding ADUs. You just lost the protection of your buyer due diligence. So if you've gained it at one point by having them sign it, then stick with it. Be polite, be helpful, but make sure you maintain that protection. Be like, I would love to give you a definitive answer, but the reality is I deal in a lot of cities. Mapleton's just one of them. Let's go down to the city. I'll even show you where the building department is, and we'll get you in touch with the right people. How's that? Am I doing my job? Heck yeah, I am. Am I keeping my protection? Yeah, I am. That's the idea. So these are good improvements that we've made to both the EBB and the ERS. One little tactical note, even though they are on utahrealestate.com in the legacy section, you can see them. There's a little red updated last week. They're still not into SkySlope forms yet, but my understanding is they will be updated in SkySlope forms probably by the end of the week. So just be aware of that. Any final questions, comments, concerns? All right. Thank you all for being on the call. Happy hunting, and have a great week.
Thank you.